Hello, you're listening to the Charles Bonnet Syndrome podcast. My name is Shaimond, and today's special guest is Eriko Watanabe. She's an artist from Germany, and she's going to talk about some of her art today, and I'm so glad to have you with me. So, how you doing today, Eriko?
Hello, Shaimond. I'm very, very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to have you here. And one thing I just want to say is we know that people that are blind or that have a visual impairment are just as capable to do anything that anyone else can do. And by having you, and we're going to have a series of artists on talk about their artwork, this is just one small way of showing that people that have a visual impairment, they can be artists, they can do anything they want to be. So I just wanted to let the audience know that you're one of the few artists that is going to be discussing your work.
All right.
So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Eriko Watanabe. I am speaking to you today from Augsburg. That's in southern Germany in Bavaria. But originally, I am from Japan, and that's where my name comes from. And I was born and grew up there, but much of my adult life has been spent outside Japan. I lived some years in North America, and now I've been living in Germany in total of almost like a quarter century. Regarding my eye condition, I am totally blind. I lost my sight due to pediatric cancer, so I grew up being blind. Career-wise, I've worked in the field of translation for many years, and now I'm seeking further new career opportunities, possibly beyond translation. There are a few things I enjoy doing in my free time, and particularly three things that are my passions: cooking, traveling, and art making. And art making in the form of raised line drawing. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today.
Wow, thank you so much. That sounds so interesting, and everybody's story is unique, and it sounds really unique, your story. So, can you tell me a little bit about your artwork and what are some things that you do, how you go about making your art, and when you first started artwork?
Okay, well, I've been drawing it off and on since I was a child, and I picked it up. Well, there was a long time, many years that I didn't do it. Then I picked it up after I came to Germany. I met somebody who was a retired elementary school teacher, and she has worked with blind children in the field of art. And we got talking, and I sort of remembered, oh, I did that before too. So I took out my drawing kit and I started drawing again. So most of my adult life, I've been drawing as a child, off and on, but not all through. In order to create tactile raised line drawing, and the raised line drawing means that the pictures are raised and they're embossed on the paper so you can feel them with your fingertips. And in order to create this type of art, you have to use a raised line drawing kit. This kit is used by people who are blind or visually impaired, often in educational settings like math or social studies classes, for drawing diagrams, graphs, maps. But it can be also used in art making, and that's what I do. And the kit consists of three components. First of all, a soft, like thin mat with a rubberized surface. Maybe you can think of something like, I don't know, Shaimond, do you know this baking mat that you bake cookies or a pastry or something like that on?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so something like that, only smaller, that acts as a soft base. And also you need a thin plastic or film paper that's placed on the mat, and then some sort of stylus. I use a ballpoint pen. And how it works on a concept of pressure displacement on a sort of deformable surface. You draw a line using a pen on this plastic paper, and because of the soft surface of the mat beneath it, the line that you create will rise, it will come up. It's like you scratch on the paper, and these lines remain on the paper. So people who are blind can trace these lines with the fingertips and to interpret what they have drawn. And that's how it works. And that's the kit I use. And because of this tactile feedback, people who cannot see can track what they are drawing and can create various shapes. The subjects of my drawing, I usually make my pictures based on personal experiences. Well, indirect and direct. When direct experiences, with that I mean things like I've heard, or I've read, or something that somebody describes to me. But of course, if that's a first-hand experiences, they're much better. My pictures often come from my holiday inspirations. I mentioned earlier that I like traveling, and traveling is a time where I get to experience things more, like with a great intensity. So a lot of pictures do come from my travel experiences. The components of my drawing are experiences through senses, other than eyesight, obviously, because I don't see. Touch is probably the most predominant in my picture, but I also incorporate other sensory experiences into my pictures, such as sound, smell, taste, feeling, or emotion. So the style of my drawing, maybe you can just say, well, there are literal lines indicating real physical forms and metaphorical lines. They indicate things that are intangible. And I would say my pictures are the combination of both. General, like this rough classification, literal versus metaphoric, I'd like to elaborate on that later, because it's obviously different from how sighted people perceive because of the absence of vision in my case.
Can you talk about some of your artwork, the different types of things that you have drawn or that you have created?
Right. Well, the literal things are like the bouquet of flowers or tree. Those are the things that I can explore by touch. But the things that are not tangible, like I sometimes draw a picture of my emotions, like a picture depicting anger or taste of chocolate, something like that. They are more like metaphorical. And the mixture, the combination of literal and metaphoric lines are something like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I once drew a picture about my habanero uh, eating experience. Shaimond, have you tried habanero? It's this hot chili pepper.
No, I haven't.
I've read it's come from Amazon, but it's used in Mexican cuisine. It's really, really, really hot chili pepper. And when I was traveling in Mexico, I got to try this habanero. And now I use it regularly in my cooking. I somehow got attracted to it. But the first time I tried it, I couldn't believe it. Like, it was so hot and it was exploding. And in my picture, I first draw a physical form of a habanero pepper. I had it in my hand at a market. So I placed it in the center of my picture. And around it, I created some jotted thick lines indicating this exploding taste of a hot chili pepper. And then around it, all around the page, I also drew lines indicating my emotions while having chili peppers for the first time. I was excited, I was feeling a bit giddy, and those things are all combined in my one picture.
That is so interesting. So that's usually how most art is created, whether we realize it or not. If you feel in love, you write a love song, or if you feel inspired, you write something. So that's good that you take things that are around you and from your experiences. And that's really interesting. So you've really traveled all over the world, right? I know you lived in North America. You were born in Japan. So
Right.
you've traveled to a lot of, do you know how many countries you visited?
Oh, I don't know. I've counted once that it was like 40, 50. Of course, it is a nice thing that I live in Europe, and some countries are much closer than like living in America.
Yeah, that really helps. I've been to times you can drive a car for 2 hours or take a train and stuff, and
Right.
that definitely really helps. So you have incorporated also not just tactile, but you said sometimes you incorporate smell and other things. Can you talk about that process and how do you do that with artwork?
Yeah, when I create pictures, I visualize those things. I don't draw things directly from the place I'm visiting. Usually I create pictures afterwards. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how I visualize things, and I'm putting this word in quotations because that visualization it's a strong association with eyesight.
Certainly, yeah. And it could be like an oxymoron or something that they say that just doesn't go with not having sight and visualizing, but you can visualize in your mind and you can
Uh,
visualize because the brain controls visualization anyway. But
I
certainly, I'm sure that the guests would love to hear you talk about how you visualize. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I think I would like to define the word visualizing because it's a bit confusing. I think I would say visualizing to me is constructing or reconstructing something in my mind in a voluntary manner. And that's doable for me because I have mind, and it's just my visualization is not sight based. I use touch when I try to visualize something, and I also use other remaining senses. Voices, like when I think about a particular friend, I don't just uh, think about this the physical form, if this is a tall person, a petite, small person, but I think about this person's voice, for example. Or if I visualize a donkey, I once got to ride one when I was in Cyprus. And a donkey, when I think about donkey, I not just think about as a physical form, but it's soft, it's fluffy, it's very, I don't know, um, you feel really safe. Like if you sit on a horse, you stay alert. But on donkey, you feel really relaxed, and it's warm. It has a very warm, as a felt warm, the body temperature. So that when I think about a donkey, or try to visualize a donkey, I think about the physical form of it, its long ears, but also the warmth of its body.
That's fascinating. Think about that. And I like what you said, it's in the mind because the mind is so powerful. Did you actually have, do you remember when you lost your sight, like how old you are, or was
uh,
it before?
Yes, I was actually, I don't remember because I was a baby. I had a surgery on one eye when I was 1 year old. And a half a year later, I have a surgery on another eye. So by the time I can talk, I was already blind. I don't remember anything about, I have no like, recollection of having seen something.
Okay. I don't think we discussed this yet. You actually do not have Charles Bonnet syndrome, right?
No, I don't, because well, I first came across the term Charles Bonnet syndrome for the first time. I think in a few weeks ago when I was asked to come to this interview, and I read something about it. And correct me, please, if I'm wrong. I think people who are having Charles Bonnet syndrome they experience their sight loss later in life, right? Mostly.
Well, not always.
Not.
Mostly, yes, because
Mhm.
mostly there are some people that are children that have Charles Bonnet syndrome, but they usually lose their eyesight after they have memories like that they can remember, like maybe if they're 4 or 5 and they can remember some things. But if you were born blind, you can't get Charles Bonnet syndrome. So yes, and most people that have Charles Bonnet syndrome
Mhm.
are older. And the reason for that is because when you get older, you start to develop eye problems sometimes, like macular degeneration,
Right.
glaucoma. So really,
Glaucoma.
the simple answer to your question is yes, but I have spoken to people that have had Charles Bonnet syndrome when they were
Mhm.
children. Yes, yes. So
Okay.
now the reason that I wanted you to be on this podcast and talk is because I think it's so important what you're doing. You do great work. I've seen some of your work and I've heard other We'll talk about your work. And then also, I wanted to show people that just because they're blind or they have a visual impairment, they can still be an artist. They can still do a lot of things or anything that someone that has sight can do. So I just wanted to, because I feel like anything that could benefit the lives of someone with Charles Bonnet syndrome, which also is always someone that has a visual impairment, is good.
Mhm.
So I'm so grateful that you're talking about your process and what you do. Yeah.
Okay.
So can you talk a little bit about, because you do different types? I know you do tactile, and I know that means that it's raised and you can feel it. But I've seen some of your work. There's different types of things that you're doing. So would you be able to talk about some different kind of maybe things that you've experimented with, or artists' work that you've experimented with?
Right. Let's see. Maybe I can just tell you the meaning of the lines in my art making processes, but it could be different from the ones done by sighted people. There is a shift, I would call it, I think, a shift between what's considered literal and metaphorical um, in the picture that I make that's different from pictures done by sighted people. And this shift occurs sometimes in very unexpected ways. I first like to concentrate on the shift in the realm of physical forms. Traditionally speaking, lines that represent physical forms, things you can see and I can touch, would be literal. And things beyond my tactile reach would be metaphorical. That's probably the first difference. Because if you see things, you can see, how can I say this more broader? Like you can see much farther than my tactile reach. So
Right.
that's the first thing that's probably different. I can give you one example. We were traveling in Tuscany, in Italian, and we were driving in a car. And my husband, he's sighted, he was telling me, well, these rows of cypress trees in the countryside, they are standing like soldiers. And this description got me really interested. I was really inspired, and I drew a picture based on that description. Now, prior to that, I did explore a cypress tree, I think a couple of cypress trees, and they're tall, they're composed, they're slender, they're upright, they're very, I would call, handsome trees. And so I knew I had some ideas of how these cypress trees would look like, but the rows of them standing in like soldiers, I imagine in my head, well, maybe it is not just placed randomly all over the place, but they are in some sort of arranged order, maybe at a regular interval. So I drew a picture. Now, this picture, all the cypress trees that I drew in it, they are actually metaphorical for me because I didn't get out the car and explore each of them. But if my husband would be drawing the picture from the same scenery, that'll be, I think that'll be literal. And that's only within the realm of physical forms. Now, the situation get a little more complex in terms of this shift when I try to incorporate other senses. Traditionally, non-visual or non-tactile experience are considered metaphorical because they don't involve physical structures. But in a broader sense, lines representing my auditory experiences, for example, a piece of music, a song, a piece of music, they're actually real and therefore somehow literal to me. I did not imagine the song. The picture of this music reflects actually the sounds that were physically present. It does not have physical form you can touch or you can see, but nevertheless, it is real to me. And this shift of boundaries, it occurs sometimes in a very strange or reverse way from the sighted concept. I can give you one example. I once attended a New Year concert when we were traveling in Sicily, and this local music band played some cheerful samba tunes. And I created musicians playing each instrument. I think there were 5 people playing different musical instruments. One was playing the piano and trumpet, saxophone, and guitar and a bass, I think a bass. And I made pictures rather figurative. So I drew each person, each musician in detail, an instrument in detail. And actually, I tested on my sighted friends, and they could actually identify the musicians and what they were playing. But the thing is, I didn't go up to each of them and touch them, the musicians, or their instruments. I drew this picture based on the music that I heard. So for me, the music was literal, but the musicians, although they have all very figurative physical figures, forms, they're actually metaphorical to me. So this interplay between the literal and metaphorical, or real and imaginative, and that's what really fascinates me.
That's really actually very fascinating. That's amazing because I would think like, how could you draw an instrument if you didn't touch it? But you're showing how you do that, and that's really amazing. Yeah. So, have you ever? I'm assuming you have touched instruments throughout your life. Have you done that before, or is it just something from your mind and you connect it with the music and make the instrument, draw the instrument?
Do you mean if I have ever touched musicians or musical instruments? Or
Yes. Have you ever touched them? Because you drew them, and your friends were able to identify which instrument the musicians had. So that's
well,
amazing.
well, musicians, not so much. I don't usually touch people, but instruments, yes, I had. I used to play trumpet, so I had trumpet in my hand, or saxophone. I used to play a piano. So musical instrument, yes, I have touched them. But the musicians, that's more like imaginative based on my hearing experience.
That's good you're not touching people randomly. They're gonna say, "What's
Not always.
you?" Yeah, yeah. But I definitely meant the instruments. But that is really amazing. And are you working on maybe possibly having like an exhibit of any of your work, or have you done things like that?
I have done some art shows with some other visually impaired artists. I've done that a couple of times. Um, Art exhibition on my own, I done that a couple of times, but not recently. So
So,
that'll be great if I can have another one somewhere.
if possible, would you want to be like a full time artist, or you like it more as a hobby and you like to do other things? Because I know you said you're kind of thinking about a new career, a new job
Right.
opportunity.
I'm not quite sure. Until now, it was my free time. Well, since I was working in the field of translation and it requires accuracy. So it was something that sort of, I don't know how I can say this, the balance to have some creativity that I cannot have in my work. So it was a
Okay.
big, good balance. If I like to work as a full-time artist, I'm not quite sure because until now it's a serious hobby. I would call it. So if I have a chance, yeah, sure. But I'm not quite sure how I can do that as a full time.
If it's meant to be, it could happen one day. But I've heard many artists and many people say that when you have a passion and a hobby and it becomes a full time job, you need to get a new hobby because it's going to be different. You know, you're going to spend a lot. You have deadlines and you have responsibilities and
Right,
things you have to do, and sometimes they say it's good to have a new hobby.
right. Then it becomes work.
Yeah, yeah. So, what would you say to someone that's listening to this podcast and they're blind or they have a severe visual impairment and they're saying, I can never draw, I can never make art? What would you say to them?
Well, I think that's a very widespread notion. And what I like to say is, well, how about keeping margins? I'm a big fan of margins because that sort of suggests there are a lot of possibilities hidden in there, but you don't have to tap into it today. Because if somebody's lazy like myself, you don't want to tackle things all the time. But I believe in keeping margins. Maybe you want to try it tomorrow. Maybe you want to try it some other time, but just don't give it up too quickly. Just sort of have your opportunities like not fully open. If not possible, then probably ajar. I think that's a good approach.
Okay. And also too, maybe you may not be interested in making art, but you may be interested in doing something else like crocheting or I don't know, cooking or whatever it is, because there's so many different things that people can do. I think art is therapeutic, and even if you can't draw or you can't paint,
Hmm.
you don't have to do it very well, but you can just try it. Just like it's very popular in America, and I'm sure it's probably popular in Germany maybe. They have these paint and sips, and even if you don't drink, you can drink water or lemonade. And then they have an instructor in the front of the room, and they say, everybody go to the left, and everybody,
Right.
put the blue. And I'm not a good artist, and it looks terrible. My wife, she does wonderful. She paints very well, and she's not like a full-time artist. She just has that talent.
Hmm.
And I just do it, and just it's just good to be around other people. I mean, I know you do your artwork alone, right? Do you work with teams sometime? Have you ever collaborated with other artists to work on a piece or work on something?
I'm not together. I a couple of times I came together with other artists who are visually impaired, but we did the show together during a very short period of time, like a couple of months. But I've never worked with somebody, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe it's something. Yeah, it's good to be open because sometimes if something's a really big project, or even people play the piano together, one person sits on the left of the bench and the other person sits on the right, and they do things. So it just popped in my mind. So okay, you tell them maybe not now, but don't be scared to give it a try.
Right. I think the problem or challenge surrounding the visual art for blind people is often there's a lack of encouragement, a lack of opportunities to try out, and also interest because people say very quickly, well, if it has something to do with vision, I cannot do it. And the thing is that there's this notion that it has to make sense visually. Like if you're making a picture, it has to make sense visually. Well, I think it only has to make sense to you.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, where can people find these art kits, these blind art kits? Can you get them like online, Amazon or something, or where would you find some kits?
Oh, I'm not quite sure about in North America, but usually there are shops specifying assistive things for people with visual impairment, like an online shop selling canes or clocks, tactile clocks, things like that. And they usually have a raised line drawing kit.
Okay. And if somebody doesn't have a raised line drawing kit, what are some things that they can try, some alternatives that they can do to maybe start drawing on their own, or with some things that they have around the house?
Well, like I said, maybe you can just use this baking mat instead of from the kit. And then you have to have some paper on top of it. It should be something that's durable, but at the same time flexible. Something it does not stretch very quickly. And then some sort of a stylus where you can just use the ballpoint pen or some other drawing tool with a pointed tip. Then you can try it out, or something. Perhaps if you have something with a structured surface, like a net. I don't know. You can just sort of pull the nets over a wooden, I don't know how you call it, the wood, and then you can sort of put the nets over it so that have some structured surface. And you put a paper on top of it. And if you draw something, the line will be tactile. So you can actually try it out that way.
Okay, that is really interesting. I'm sure some people are going to give it a shot. You never know. Yeah, you
Yeah,
never know. You may be good. You may be good, and even if you're not good, you may enjoy it. And even if not, it may lead you to try other things that you never thought that you would do. So it's really good to be open to different things.
right.
Yeah.
And I suggest, I think the persistence is also crucial and not giving up very quickly. I try to do things at least 3 times before I say, well, I can't do it. Because sometimes the first try doesn't really work out. It was the same with my tactile drawing. Like when I was drawing pictures as a child, I didn't receive very positive comments. And it was a bit disappointing. Like when I was in elementary school, I read this fairy tale and I wanted to draw a picture from a scene from this book. That was a fairy, was a male fairy, like galloping on a white dazzling horse across a field or something like that. And as I was drawing a horse and a person, my art teacher said, "Oh, you were drawing a pig," and I was like, "No." So that was disappointing, but things like that happened. And also, like as an adult, my attempts don't always work out. I once drew a picture. It's called Eddie's Island. Eddie is somebody from Flores Island, that's in Indonesia. When we were traveling in Australia, I had a chance to see his performance. He did his some indigenous music, songs, and dances. And I drew this picture of dead Eddie dancing and singing in his indigenous language. And I thought I captured the scene very well. But husband, he looked at it and said, "Oh, somebody's throwing up." And I was like, "What?" Because, well, the Eddie was, well, I happened to pick a scene where Eddie was bending forward and then
Mhm.
he was singing at the same time. So I drew lines indicating these words coming out of his mouth, but there was not the real letters, but all the jotted lines heading towards the ground. So it was a bit of a mishap, but well, we still have fun.
So you can't be scared to fail or make a mistake or something turn out different than you imagine it to someone else, that has sight or something.
No,
So
I don't think you have to,
difference.
because like I said, it only has to make sense to you.
That's so true. Yeah, I like that. I really like that. And don't let it get you down. And okay, I'll try next time. Well, that's not what I meant, but this is what it
Right,
felt like. It's the
right,
process sometimes. It's not the end result sometimes.
right.
Wow, that is amazing. So is there anything that you would like people to know, or anything that you would like to say to the listeners as we wrap this up?
I think what I like to say is that it would be good if each of us have something that keeps us connected to the world around us and to engage ourselves with the world around us in whatever accessible way. For me, it until now it has worked with raised line drawing, cooking, and traveling, but it could be something else. And I think it's a fun process. Sometimes it's strenuous, but to just to try to find what suits what's best for you.
Okay, I like how you said stay connected to the world too. So that's really important too, because sometimes when people have a visual impairment or they're blind, they can maybe not want to get out, and they may not have people around them, or may not want to use the cane or the guide dog. So, what are
Mm.
some ways? I mean, I know you have a husband. And I'm sure he's a loving husband. What are some ways that you are able to travel so much and get out so much? How have you adapted, and what are some ways that you're able to experience life the way you do, even though you're blind?
Well, I think that what keeps me motivated, and that's the curiosity. That's one thing about the world around me, and I'm really really grateful. I have this husband who travels with me, and he reads things out in the museum and he describes things in the showcases. He always finds things that I can touch indoors or outdoors. So I'm really grateful. But I think the key is curiosity and stay curious about the world around you. And in order to do that, I think it's important to try to live life mindfully. Shaimond, you mentioned mindfulness, the importance of it. I think in one of your earlier episodes, it was about the cognitive appraisal theory.
Yeah.
And I believe I agree to that because staying and exercising mindfulness, you stay curious. Because if you're not interested, you don't do anything, and then the world wouldn't offer you much opportunities. And another thing I really wanted to say about the world, because we are talking about the world, sometimes I get comments that suggest that people might think like my art is something special because it expresses my world, which is different from the world that other people live in. And I have a different view on this. I think I consider myself as part of the world. I consider myself sharing the same universe, the same world with the others. So being blind doesn't make me any, I don't know, like unspoiled of like
Yeah,
untainted souls or anything like that, as I often get comments. But it's not really like that. We are sharing the same world. My world is just as full of colors and light and things and landscapes. I'm very interested in these things. I do not have access to everything in the world, but I'm connected to it, and I'm also not free from all the worldly concerns. So I think it's a good thing if you have this feeling of a connectedness.
that is so important. And I thank you for saying that. And thank you for having a positive attitude and being able to tell people what has worked for you and how you are able to do the things that you do and inspire
Right.
people. I'm sure they're going to get some good information from this episode and things that you had to say.
Well, I'm trying. I'm trying. I'm still in the middle of it.
Yeah, yeah, we're all learning and there's more to learn and more to grow. But it's amazing that we can inspire others while we're on our journey of being inspired
Well,
also.
if it works like that, I'll be really grateful.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your story. And I look forward to this. Do you have like a website or an email address people can maybe get in contact with you or hear some of your art or anything for the listeners?
Oh, I'm in the process of doing that. I have a YouTube channel that has nothing to do with my art. That's more of my traveling experiences. But I'm in the process of setting up a website, and I like to put up my artwork there.
Okay, so once you have it, let me know and I can put it in the show notes and they can definitely check out the artwork that you have and be inspired by it.
Great, sure.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate this. It was great and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much.